Chapter 1. The Orange Peel on the Brass Rail. The first thing Alaric Voss noticed on the Cairo Ferry was not the... It was a curl of orange peel, balanced on the polished brass rail, cut in one unbroken spiral, and left drying like a small golden snake. The ferry itself, the Nur el Nil, waited at Boulac Landing with its lamps already lit, though the sun still held a copper edge above the city. Men in white jackets carried crates of glassware. A boy in sandals dragged a sack of charcoal that left a black trail over the gangplank. From somewhere below came the wet slap of rope against wood. Voss stood very straight beside his luggage, one gloved hand resting on the handle of his narrow leather case. He was Swiss by birth, from Lausanne, carried neatness with him as other men carried impatience. His collar was exact, his cuffs perfectly even, his dark hair parted with mathematical care. In his breast pocket lay a narrow strip of pale blue ribbon. When he observed a contradiction, he tied one small knot in. He did not explain this habit to strangers. "You dislike the ferry, Monsieur Voss?" asked Madame Noor Rahmani, the evening's hostess. "I dislike nothing so early," Voss replied. "Dislike is a conclusion, and conclusions are vulgar when rushed. I observe only that someone aboard eats oranges with a surgeon's discipline." Madame Rahmani laughed, though not freely. She was a widow with rings on nearly every finger, and a voice trained by years of charity supper was to raise money for a girls' school in Minya. That was what the invitation said. The guest list, however, contained too many collectors, dealers, diplomats, and antiquities, men for education to be the whole purpose. Dr. Miriam Sayegh came aboard last. She was 42, tall, spare, and dressed in dark blue linen that made no attempt to flatter her. Her face was not beautiful, but it had the authority of a carved coin. She carried a black document case under one arm and corrected the deck steward on the pronunciation of her name before he had finished greeting her. "Sayegh," she said. "Not Sayegh. If you are to announce guests, you might announce them accurately. Is a small courtesy, and small courtesies are where civilization is." Behind her came her assistant, Farid Mansour, handsome young man, with damp eyes and a collar too tight for his neck. He apologized to the steward on her behalf, then apologized to Dr. Sayegh for apologizing. Voss watched him with mild interest. The other guests gathered under the awning where green lamps swung from brass hooks. Colonel Ashford, retired from the British service, wore a cream dinner jacket and the air of a man who expected history to consult him before proceeding. Youssef Darwish, a dealer in old things, kissed every hand except those of the men. Captain Nabil Saad, master of the ferry, stood about with stiff pride, as if the boat were a uniform. Layla Haddad, the charity nurse, poured mint water for an elderly guest, and noticed who took sugar without asking. She had a soft round face, practical hands, and the patient manner of someone used to being overlooked. People thanked her warmly and forgot her at once. Voss did not. Dr. Sayegh refused mint water. She asked for coffee, black. "Tonight is not for pleasure," she told Madame Rahmani. "I agreed to attend because your late husband purchased certain objects whose history has become inconvenient." Madame Rahmani's smile thinned. "My dear Miriam, you promised discretion. The river is full of ears when Cairo society boards a boat." "The river may have ears," Dr. Sayegh said. "It has no conscience." Voss turned slightly toward the rail. His fingers entered his breast pocket and tied one neat knot in the pale ribbon. By 8 o'clock the ferry had pushed into the Nile. Cairo loosened behind them in layers of lamp smoke, carriage noise, and distant music. Dinner was served in the saloon, a long cedar room with brass fans turning slowly. The windows showed black water sliding past, broken now and then by the reflection of a lamp on another boat. Dr. Sayegh sat opposite Voss. She ate very little. She kept touching the black document case beside her chair with the outer edge of her shoe. "You guard your papers with feeling," Voss observed. "I guard the truth with difficulty," she replied. "Papers are easier. They do not flatter, plead, or inherit." Colonel Ashford gave a dry cough. "Academics always speak as if money were a disease contracted by other people." Dr. Sayegh looked at him. "Collectors always speak as if theft becomes history after 20 years. The table tightened around her, though no one named the discomfort. Darwish began praising the stuffed vine leaves in a voice too bright to be sincere. Farid spilled wine onto his cuff and dabbed at it as if wounded. Layla Haddad rose quietly to fetch soda water. Voss watched the nurse pass behind Dr. Sayegh. Layla's hand hovered for the smallest moment above the black document case, not touching it. Then she moved on. After dinner, Madame Rahmani announced coffee on the upper deck. Dr. Sayegh declined. "I must review a statement before we dock," she said. "I shall join you later, if later deserves me." Her cabin was number 6, starboard side, with a narrow door, a brass latch, porthole, too small for even a child to pass through. Farid walked her there. Captain Sard saw the door close. Colonel Ashford claimed he heard the latch turn. At 9:15, a cry came from the passage. Farid Mansour stood outside cabin 6 with both hands pressed against the door. "She does not answer. She told me to return in 20 minutes. She always answers when she gives an order." Captain Sard unlocked the door with his master key. The cabin was empty. The porthole was bolted from within. The bed had not been used. The black document case lay open on the floor, empty. On the washstand sat a cup of black coffee, untouched, with a perfect crescent of orange peel beside it. Voss entered last. He did not look at the open case first, nor the porthole, nor the cup. He looked at the floor beneath the washstand. There, a faint crescent of damp grit, was the print of a bare heel, and beside it, almost hidden beneath the leg of the washstand, lay one pale blue bead. Chapter 2. What the cabin refused to admit. The first person to speak inside the cabin was not the captain, nor the assistant, nor even Madame Rahmani. She stood nearest the door as if proximity might grant authority. It was Alaric Voss, who did not raise his voice, and did not address anyone in particular. "This room," he said, "is attempting to persuade us of something. It is doing so with admirable consistency. Unfortunately, it is persuading us of a falsehood." Farid turned sharply. His face had lost its colour, but not its eagerness to be useful. "Falsehood? Monsieur, she is gone. The window is sealed. The door was locked. There is nowhere else." "Yes," Voss said gently. "Nowhere else. It is a persuasive argument, and therefore one must examine it with suspicion." He moved deeper into the cabin with the quiet care of a man entering a chapel. The space was narrow, disciplined in its design. A single bed tucked against the wall, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a wardrobe barely wide enough for one coat, and the small brass porthole, its latch polished by years of obedient use. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something sharper beneath it. Citrus, yes, but not fresh, dried. Voss stood before the washstand and did not touch it. Captain Nabil Sard cleared his throat. "I assure you, monsieur, no one leaves a cabin like this without using the corridor, and no one uses the corridor without being seen. I have a crew trained to notice movement. It is the first duty of a captain." "And the second?" Voss asked, still studying the basin. "To maintain order," the captain said stiffly. "Then you will forgive me if I disturb it," Voss replied. "Order, when it is arranged too carefully, often hides a small rebellion." Madame Rahmani pressed her gloved fingers together. "What are you suggesting? That Dr. Sayegh staged her own disappearance? It would be absurd. She had come here to expose certain matters, not to dramatize herself." "Absurdity is not a reliable guide to truth," Voss said. "It is merely a description of our comfort." He turned then, his gaze moving not over faces but over hands. Colonel Ashford held his cane too tightly, the knuckles whitening in a manner that suggested restraint and fear. Youssef Darwish had retreated to the door, his smile now folded into something smaller and less certain. Farid Mansour hovered beside the bed, eyes flicking between the empty space where his employer should have been and the open case on the floor. Layla Haddad stood nearest the washstand. She held a folded cloth in one hand, though there was nothing to clean. Her expression was composed, attentive and faintly concerned, the expression of someone who had been useful all her life and intended to remain so. Voss's eyes rested on her for a fraction longer than politeness required. Then he knelt. A faint crescent of damp grit on the floor was still visible beneath the washstand's shadow. It had not yet dried completely, which suggested recent contact. Voss did not touch it. Instead, he leaned closer, examining the shape, the pressure, the slight unevenness at the edge where the heel had lifted. "A bare foot," Farid said quickly. "You see, she must have removed her shoes, perhaps to rest, and then vanished." Voss finished. "Yes, That is one possible narrative. He rose again, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. The print is incomplete, he continued. The weight falls heavily on the outer edge, which suggests haste or imbalance. It is not the print of a woman standing calmly at her washstand. It is the print of someone who has stepped where they should not. Captain Sard frowned. Where should they not? On a floor that is meant to remain dry, Voss said. Observe the grit. It carries the memory of water. River water, perhaps. We shall not be hasty. Farid swallowed. But the porthole... Yes, Voss said, turning at last to the small round window. Porthole is our most eloquent witness. It speaks of impossibility with great conviction. He examined the latch without touching it. Brass showed no fresh scratches, no sign of forced movement. The bolts were secure. The glass was intact, reflecting the dim interior, with a slight distortion that made the empty room seem even smaller. No one passed through here, the captain said firmly. No one passed through here, Voss agreed. Which leaves us with the question, why is it so important that we believe they might have tried? Madame Rahmani's voice sharpened. You speak in riddles, monsieur. Woman has disappeared under my care. I would prefer clarity. Clarity, Voss said, is a reward, not a starting point. He crossed to the open document case. It lay on the floor as if dropped, its contents removed with haste. The leather was of excellent quality, clasp unbroken. Inside, the lining showed the faint rectangular impression of papers that had been carried there for some time. Dr. Sayegh did not travel lightly, Voss said. Her case is empty, but not recently so. The absence of weight has left its mark. These papers were removed before she entered this cabin, or by someone who had sufficient time to do so without disturbance. Farid shook his head. Possible. She carried it aboard herself. I saw her. She would never allow anyone to touch her work. Then she allowed it once, Voss said softly. And that once is the only moment that concerns us. Layla Haddad stepped forward, her voice calm. Perhaps she took the papers with her when she left. If she left voluntarily, I mean. There are reasons a person might wish to disappear, even on a ferry. Voss regarded her. You suggest a voluntary act, Mademoiselle Haddad. That is a generous interpretation of events. I have seen people leave without explanation, she said. Illness, fear, shame. There are many reasons. Not all of them are crimes. Indeed, Voss said, and yet the coffee remains untouched. He gestured to the cup on the washstand. The surface was still, the dark liquid reflecting the lamp above, in a small, trembling circle. Beside it lay the curl of orange peel, perfectly cut, its edges already beginning to dry. Dr. Sayegh requested coffee, Voss continued. She received it. She did not drink it. Instead she left. All was taken before the first sip. That suggests interruption. Interruption suggests another person. Colonel Ashford shifted his weight, or it suggests she changed her mind. Women are known to. Colonel, Voss said, not unkindly. Your experience with women may not be our most reliable evidence. A faint smile touched Yusef Darwish's lips, then vanished as quickly as it came. Voss returned to the washstand. His gaze lingered on the orange. Such precision, he murmured. A single continuous cut. It requires patience, certain pride in the result. One does not perform such an act absent-mindedly. He slipped his hand into his breast pocket and tied another small knot in the pale blue ribbon. Farid noticed the movement. What is that? He asked, his voice thin with nerves. A method, Voss said. I record contradictions. When they accumulate, they form a pattern. Patterns, properly understood, become truth. And what contradictions do you see here? Madame Rahmani demanded. Voss straightened. A locked room that insists on impossibility. A disappearance that leaves behind no sign of struggle, yet interrupts a simple act like drinking coffee. A document case that has been emptied with care, yet discarded with haste. An orange peel that suggests leisure in a moment that permits none. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, bare foot where shoes would have been more appropriate. Captain Sard exhaled slowly. You believe she is still on the ferry? I believe, Voss said, that the ferry is larger than it appears and smaller than it admits. Both facts are relevant. Layla Haddad tilted her head. You speak as if the boat itself were involved. All structures are involved, Voss replied. They shape what can be done within them. A locked cabin is not merely a room, it is a statement. Farid pressed his hands together. Then what do? We cannot simply stand here while she is. Gone? Voss supplied. Yes, that is the word we are invited to use. He moved toward the door, then stopped, if remembering something trivial. "Captain," he said. "Who prepared the coffee?" Sard blinked. "The galley steward, of course." "Why does that matter?" "It may not," Voss said, "but one must always account for the small courtesies. They are where civilization hides." He stepped into the corridor, his posture as precise as ever. Behind him, the cabin remained exactly as it had been arranged, tidy, convincing, quietly dishonest. At the far end of the passage, a faint draught stirred, carrying with it the smell of river water and something else, something like damp wood, hidden and patient. Voss paused, just long enough to notice. Then he walked toward it. Chapter 3. The corridor that measured footsteps. The corridor outside cabin 6 did not invite attention. It was narrow, lined with varnished cedar panels that reflected lamplight in dull, obedient streaks. The carpet runner, faded red, with a pattern too intricate to be remembered, softened every footstep into something polite and forgettable. Doors stood evenly spaced along one side, each identical in width, each bearing a small brass number polished to the same careful shine. Yet to Alaric Voss, the corridor possessed a quality that could not be polished away. It measured people, not by their height or their weight, but by the way they moved when they believed themselves unobserved. Voss walked slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lowered, not to the floor, but to the space just above it, where habits revealed themselves in fragments. The others followed at a respectful distance, though unwilling to disturb whatever fragile order he was constructing. Captain Sard walked first among them, his posture stiff, boots falling with deliberate rhythm. Each step was placed as if it had been rehearsed, which told Voss less about the captain's discipline than about his anxiety. Men who are entirely certain do not rehearse their footsteps. Farid Mansour came next, his movements uneven, his shoulders slightly hunched, as though bracing for a blow that had not yet been delivered. He glanced often at the doors, as if expecting one to open and restore the world to its previous arrangement. Madame Ramani moved with composed urgency, her rings clicking softly against one another as her hands folded and unfolded. Colonel Ashford leaned on his cane more heavily than necessary, not from weakness, but from the desire to appear anchored. Layla Haddad walked last. She made almost no sound. This, more than anything, held Voss's attention. Not silence itself, silence can be practiced, but the absence of adjustment. Most people, when attempting quiet, overcompensate. They shorten their stride, hold their breath, become conscious of their own bodies. Layla did none of these things. She moved as she always moved, which meant she had nothing to conceal in her movement, or had learned long ago how concealment should feel. Voss reached the end of the corridor and stopped. There, where the cedar panelling met a narrower service passage, the air changed. It was cooler, carrying a faint dampness that did not belong to the carefully maintained guest quarter. A single lamp hung from a hook, its light weaker, its glass slightly clouded. "Crew access," Captain Sard said quickly. "It leads to the storage compartments and the engine space. There is nothing of interest there for passengers." "Nothing of interest," Voss repeated, a phrase that often precedes discovery. He stepped into the passage without waiting for permission. The change in space was immediate. The carpet ended, replaced by bare wooden planks that bore the marks of use, scratches, small dents, darkened grain where water had been absorbed and dried 100 times over. The ceiling lowered slightly, and the walls lost their polished sheen, revealing the practical structure beneath the ferry's elegant exterior. Voss paused just inside the threshold. Then, very carefully, he bent his head. The smell here was different. Not merely damp wood, that was present. Not merely the faint oil of machinery, though that lingered in the air. There was something else, something sharper, cleaner, oddly out of place. Citrus, but not fresh citrus. Not the bright immediate scent of a peeled orange. This was older, controlled, deliberate. He slipped his hand into his breast pocket and tied a third knot in the pale blue ribbon. Behind him, Farid spoke, his voice strained. Why would she come here? Dr. Sayegh had no reason to enter a service passage. She would have found it. Beneath her, people rarely go where they believe they will be seen, Voss said. They go where they believe they will not be noticed. Madame Rahmani drew her shawl closer. This is absurd. Miriam would not wander into a storage area. She had work to do, statements to prepare. She was very clear about her intentions. Yes, Voss said. She was very clear about what she wished others to believe her intentions were. Colonel Ashford tapped his cane against the wooden. Are you suggesting she lied about her purpose on this ferry? I am suggesting, Voss replied. That clarity is often a performance, and like all performances, it requires an audience. He moved further down the passage. Floor here showed signs of recent activity. Not obvious signs, no scattered objects, no disturbed crates, but the subtle unevenness that comes from repeated passage. One plank near the wall bore a darker stain, still faintly damp. Another showed the partial imprint of a foot, though the shape was indistinct, blurred by time and use. Voss crouched, examining the stain. Water, Captain Sard said. It seeps in from the river. The ferry is well maintained, but no vessel is entirely free of such inconveniences. Inconveniences, Voss echoed. Yes, they are often the most informative elements of a system. He touched the edge of the stain with one gloved finger, then brought it briefly to his nose. River, water, confirmed, but carried, not seeped. Pattern is wrong for leakage. Farid's voice rose. Carried? By whom? You think someone brought water into the corridor? I think, Voss said. Someone moved between two environments, one wet, one dry, left behind a memory of that transition. Layla Haddad stepped closer, expression attentive. You mean the footprint in the cabin? Yes, Voss said. The bare heel, damp with river grit. It does not belong in a clean locked-odd room. It belongs to a journey. And the journey leads here? She asked. It leads somewhere, Voss said. Whether here is the beginning, the middle, or the end remains to be seen. He rose and continued forward. Passage opened into a small storage compartment. Crates were stacked along the walls, their contents marked in neat Arabic script. Coils of rope hung from hooks. A lantern sat on a wooden crate, its flame turned low, as if recently and then forgotten. Voss approached the lantern. He adjusted the wick slightly, increasing the light. The shadows shifted, and in that shifting, something revealed itself. On the floor near the base of the far wall lay a narrow strip of fabric, not torn, not discarded, placed. Voss bent and picked it up. It was pale blue. For a moment he did not move. Then, very slowly, he compared it to the ribbon in his pocket, not by placing them side by side, but by holding the new piece at a distance, as one might consider a thought before accepting it. Farid leaned forward. What is it? A coincidence, Voss said, or its imitation. Layla's gaze lingered on the fabric. Looks like a ribbon. Yes, Voss said. It does. He folded the strip carefully and slipped it into his case. Captain Sard shifted uneasily. Proves nothing. It could belong to anyone. A crew member, a passenger. Of course, Voss said. It proves nothing. Proof is a luxury we do not yet possess. He turned toward the far wall. There, partially concealed behind a stack of crates, was a narrow door. Unlike the others, it bore no number. Its handle was worn, its paint chipped, as if it had been used often but never acknowledged. What is this? Madame Rahmani asked. A maintenance access, the captain said quickly. It leads to the lower compartments. There is no reason for any guest to. Voss placed his hand lightly on the handle. Then it will be most interesting to discover why it exists, he said. He opened the door. A draught of cooler air rose to meet them, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of the river, stronger now, closer, as if the Nile itself were breathing just beyond the threshold. The space beyond was dark, and somewhere within it, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of water touching wood. Voss stepped forward. Behind him the others hesitated, not from fear, from the quiet certainty that whatever lay beyond that door would not return the ferry to its previous arrangement. Voss paused only once, his hand briefly touching the pale blue ribbon in his pocket. Another knot would be required. Then he descended into the darkness. Chapter 4. The space beneath the polite story. The stair beyond the narrow door did not belong to the ferry's public face. Descended in a tight angle, the steps uneven in height, as though built for use rather than comfort. The wood was worn smooth at the centre and rough at the edges, where shoes had avoided splinters out of long habit. A single iron handrail ran along the right side, cold to the touch, smelling faintly of rust and river salt. Alaric Voss placed his foot on the first step and paused, not from hesitation but from calculation. He listened. Not for voices, but for patterns. The soft breathing behind him, the slight shift of fabric as someone adjusted their stance, the distant hum of the engine vibrating through the hull like a subdued pulse. And beneath all that, close now, not the distant, decorative presence of the Nile glimpsed from the upper deck, but something intimate. Something that touched the ferry continuously, patiently, without interruption. "Careful," Captain Sard said from behind him. "The lower compartments are not arranged for guests. The footing can be uncertain." "Certainty," Voss replied quietly, "is often the most honest element in a structure." He descended. The air cooled with each step. The scent of citrus that had lingered faintly in the corridor returned here, stronger, though still controlled, as if it had been introduced deliberately and allowed to settle. It did not belong to space. That alone made it significant. The base of the stairs. The space opened into a long, low compartment. The ceiling beams were exposed, thick and dark, crossing overhead like ribs. The floorboard showed darker seams where water had seeped and dried, over years that had not troubled anyone enough to repair them. Along the walls stood more crates, some marked with shipping labels, others unmarked, their surfaces scratched and dulled by handling. Narrow strip of lantern light stretched across the floor, cast from above through the open stairwell, was not enough to illuminate the whole space. It left corners untouched, shapes uncertain. Voss stepped forward, and his shoes made a different sound here, less muffled, more immediate, as though the space insisted on acknowledging each movement. Behind him, the others followed more cautiously. Farid descended last, his breath audible now, shallow and irregular. "This is madness," he muttered. "We are searching a storage compartment for a woman who has vanished from a locked room. It is absurd." "Absurdity," Voss said, without turning, "is a measure of expectation, not of truth. One must learn to distrust it." Madame Rahmani's voice came from the stair, slightly strained. "Miriam would never come here. She would have demanded proper light, proper space. She would have found this. She searched for a word and did not find one that satisfied her." "Beneath her," Colonel Ashford supplied, his tone dry, but not entirely steady. "Yes, Madame Rahmani. Exactly that." Voss stopped near the centre of the compartment. He did not look at the crates first. He looked at the floor. The dampness here was uneven, not in patches, but in traces, thin lines, where water had been carried rather than spilled. A faint arc there, as though someone had moved through the space with something that dripped only occasionally. He crouched, examining one such line. "A path," he said softly. "Not of a person, but of a condition. Wetness where dryness is expected. Dryness where wetness would be natural." Captain Sad shifted behind him. "You make it sound deliberate." "It is deliberate," Voss said. "Ferry is not less. It is structured. Therefore, deviations from that structure are meaningful." Layla Haddad moved closer, steps still quiet, still without adjustment. "You believe she was brought here," she said. "Not that she came willingly." "I believe," Voss said, "willingness is often irrelevant to outcome. What matters is movement. Who moved? How? And why does it leave such careful traces?" Voss. He rose and turned, slowly, letting his gaze travel across the compartment. The crates nearest the wall were stacked with precision, their edges aligned. The rope coils hung in neat loops. Even the lantern placed on a crate showed a kind of order. It had been set down, not dropped, but one section, near the far corner, resisted that order. A crate there stood slightly out of alignment, not enough to attract attention in casual passing, not enough to be called a disorder. Just enough. Voss approached it. He did not touch it immediately. Instead, he observed the space around it, the floor, the wall behind it, the faint shadow it cast. "Captain," he said, "how often are these crates moved?" "Rarely," Sard replied. "They are loaded at the start of a journey and remain until unloading. There is no reason to disturb them." "No reason," Voss repeated. "And yet this one has been disturbed." He placed his hand lightly against the crate and shifted it. It moved more easily than it should have. Behind it, the wall was not continuous. There was a narrow gap, no more than a few inches wide, running vertically between two panels. The wood there showed a difference in colour, slightly lighter, as though it had been exposed more recently. Farid leaned forward, his voice rising. "What is that?" "A hidden space." "Not hidden," Voss said. "Merely neglected." "There is a difference. Hidden spaces are designed to be found by those who know how. neglected spaces are overlooked by everyone. He traced the edge of the panel with his finger. There, a slight irregularity. Seam where none should be. A door, Colonel Ashford said, his tone sharpening. A possibility of a door, Voss corrected. Let us not grant certainty prematurely. He pressed gently against the panel. It did not move. He adjusted his hand, applying pressure slightly higher, slightly to the side. Only a fraction, only enough to confirm resistance rather than immobility. Layla watched him closely. You expected that, she said. I expected inconsistency, Voss replied. It has rewarded me. Captain Sard stepped forward, his composure tightening. If there is maintenance access, this ferry is under my command. Nothing exists here without my knowledge. Then this, Voss said calmly, is either not a maintenance access, or it exists without your knowledge. Sard's jaw set. Farid swallowed hard. Open it, he said. If she is here. If she is here, Madame Rahmani interrupted. Voice strained, controlled. We will know soon enough. There is no need for dramatics. Voss glanced at her briefly. Madame, he said, drama is not created by opening doors. It is created by what waits behind them. He placed both hands against the panel and pushed. This time, gave. Not fully, not easily, but enough. The wood shifted inward with a dull, reluctant sound, revealing a narrow space beyond, darker than the compartment, narrower still, as if carved from the ferry's structure rather than built into it. A draught of colder air flowed out, and with it, the smell of the river, stronger now, mixed with something else. Not decay, not yet. Something quieter, something that suggested absence rather than present. Farid stepped back, his hand rising to his mouth. No, he whispered. No, this is impossible. Impossible, Voss said, is a word we have used too often tonight. It has become unreliable. He took a lantern from the crate and adjusted the wick, increasing the light. Then he stepped into the narrow space. The others hesitated. Even Captain Sard, who had insisted on order, did not immediately follow. Layla Haddad stood very still. Her gaze did not move to the opening. It remained on Voss, just for a moment. Then she stepped forward as well. Inside, space was barely wide enough for one person to stand comfortably. The walls were rough, unfinished, the wood showing the marks of tools that had shaped it long ago and then been forgotten. The floor sloped slightly, accommodating something that had once been placed there. Voss held the lantern higher. The light spread, and in that light something caught it, not large, not obvious, but unmistakable. A small dark stain on the wood, fresh, not water. Voss did not speak. He lowered the lantern slightly, bringing the stain into clearer. Behind him, the others crowded the opening, their breaths overlapping, presence filling the narrow space with tension they did not name. Farid's voice came, barely controlled. What is it? Voss considered the stain for a moment longer. Then he said, very quietly, it is the beginning of a story that this ferry has tried very hard not to tell. He straightened. For the first time since entering the lower compartments, he did not immediately move forward. Instead, he reached into his pocket, tied another knot in the pale blue ribbon. Chapter 5. The statement no one remembered giving. The narrow space did not offer the comfort of a conclusion. It offered a question that had been forced into silence. Alaric Voss remained inside the cramped opening for a moment longer than politeness required. The lantern held low, its light steady in his unmoving hand. The small dark stain on the wood did not spread. It did not drip, simply existed, contained, deliberate, and recent enough to resist explanation. Behind him, the presence of the others pressed inward. None stepped fully inside. Captain Sard spoke first, his voice tight with the effort to remain authoritative. That could be anything. Oil, rust, a mark from cargo. There is no reason to assume. There is always a reason to assume, Voss said quietly. The difficulty lies in choosing which assumption deserves our attention. He stepped back into the larger compartment, allowing the others to see what he had seen without naming it for them. Farid leaned forward, his face drawn, his eyes searching the stain, as though it might resolve into something less threatening if he stared long enough. It is nothing, he said quickly. Must be nothing. She is not here. She cannot be here. No, Voss said. She is not here. Certainty in his tone silenced the others more effectively than denial could have done. Madame Rahmani exhaled slowly, her composure returning in layers. Then we are wasting time. Miriam has disappeared, and we are examining a storage compartment for stains and loose panels. It is inefficient. Efficient. Voss said, is often mistaken for progress. They are not the same. He moved away from the hidden panel, his attention shifting not outward but backward, as if retracing steps that had already been taken. The cabin, he said. We must return to it. Farid straightened at once. Yes, of course. There may be something we missed. Some sign. There are always signs, Voss said. The question is whether we recognize them as such. They ascended the narrow stair in a different order than they had descended. Layla, her dad, followed, Voss this time, her step still quiet, still without adjustment. Captain Sard came behind them, his movements less controlled now, his boots striking the wood with a sharper edge. Madame Rahmani and Colonel Ashford followed together, their conversation absent, replaced by a shared attention to the unfolding situation. Farid lingered at the bottom for a moment, as though reluctant to leave the space behind. Then he climbed quickly, almost stumbling in his haste. The corridor above felt narrower than before, not physically, but in its intention. It no longer pretended to be neutral. Paused outside. Cabin 6. The door remained open. The room is unchanged, but something in the arrangement had shifted, not in position, but in meaning. He entered without hesitation. The coffee still stood on the washstand, untouched. The orange peel beside it had dried further, its edges curling inward. The open document case lay where it had been left, its emptiness more pronounced now that it had been acknowledged. Voss did not go to the washstand. Instead, he turned to Farid. You told us, he said, that Dr. Sayegh intended to prepare a statement. Farid nodded quickly. Yes. She said she would review it before we docked. It was very important. She made that. And this statement, Voss said, where is it now? Farid hesitated. I do not know. It must have been the case. Or perhaps she had it with her. She was very particular about her papers. Particular, Voss repeated. Yes, a useful quality. He moved to the case and crouched beside it. The interior lining showed the faint impressions he had noticed before. Rectangular shapes where papers had rested for some time. But now, with the perspective of the lower compartment, the absence spoke differently. These papers, Voss said, were not removed in haste. The edges are too clean. The arrangement is too precise. Whoever took them did so with care. Madame Rahmani's voice sharpened. You suggest theft, then. That is at least a practical explanation. Miriam had enemies, professional disagreements, disputes over ownership. Would not be surprising if someone wished to obtain her documents. Not surprising, Voss agreed, but incomplete. He rose and turned to the washstand. The coffee. He lifted the cup slightly, examining the surface. Still undisturbed. No ripple, trace of contact. She did not drink, he said, which suggests interruption, but interruption alone does not explain the absence of disorder. There is no sign of struggle, no overturned chair, no scattered belongings. Colonel Ashford shifted his cane. Perhaps she trusted the person who interrupted her. A possibility, Voss said. Trust simplifies many actions that would otherwise be resisted. Layla Haddad stepped closer, her gaze moving from the cup to the orange. You have mentioned that several times, she said. The orange peel, it seems trivial. Triviality, Voss said, is often a disguise. It allows important things to pass unnoticed. He set the cup back down. Then, with deliberate care, he picked up the orange peel. It is dry now, but not brittle. The cut was clean, continuous, made with a steady hand. No hesitation, no break in the line. This was done recently, he said. Not here, but before being placed here. The drying has begun, but not completed. It was brought into the cabin, not created within it. Farid frowned. But why would anyone bring an orange peel into a cabin? It makes no sense. Sense, Voss said, is not a requirement for action. Only intention is. He turned, his gaze settling on Layla. You served water during dinner, he said. Mint water, with sugar for those who requested. Yes, she said calmly. Many guests prefer it to wine. And the oranges? Voss asked. Were they served? Layla shook her head. No, not this evening. We had figs, dates, pastries. No, oranges. Voss inclined his head slightly. Then the orange peel does not belong to the meal, he said. It belongs to a person. Madame Rahmani crossed her arm. This is becoming excessively abstract. We have a missing woman, and you are constructing theories from fruit. I am constructing, Voss said, a sequence. He moved to the door and looked out into the corridor. Captain, he said, among your crew would have access to both the galley and the lower compartments. Sard hesitated. The stewards, the kitchen staff, and the maintenance crew. It is not unusual. The ferry must function as a whole. And among the guests, Voss asked, who moves freely between spaces? No one, the captain said. Guests remain in the public areas. That is the rule. Rules, Voss said softly, most interesting when they are broken. He stepped back into the room. There is one more matter, he said. Farid looked up, his expression strained. What? You said, Voss continued, that Dr. Sayegh intended to prepare a statement, that she wished to expose certain matters. Yes, Farid said. She was very clear. She said tonight would be decisive. And yet, Voss said, there is no statement, no draft, no notes, only an empty case. Farid's voice faltered. Perhaps she memorized it. She had an excellent memory. She often. No, Voss said gently. A woman who trusts paper more than people does not rely on memory for something important. He paused. Psst. Then he added, almost casually, which suggests that the statement was never meant to be written. The room seemed to tighten around that idea. Madame Rahmani's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I imply nothing, Voss said. I observe. Dr. Sayegh arrived with a purpose. She declared that purpose openly. She created an expectation. He looked at each of them in turn. And expectations, he said, the easiest things to manipulate. Lila's gaze did not waver. You think she lied, she said. I think, Voss replied, that she told a version of the truth that served her immediate need. And what needs were those? Colonel Ashford asked. Voss did not answer. Instead, he walked to the window, the small porthole that had insisted so strongly on possibility. He placed his hand near the latch, not touching it, simply observing the metal, the slight wear, the absence of disturbance. Then he said, very quietly, she needed us to believe she would remain in this room. Farid stared at him. But she didn't. She vanished. Yes, Voss said. She vanished, he repeated. He turned back to them. And yet, he added, everything in this room suggests she never intended to stay. The implication settled heavily, not as a conclusion, but as a shift in direction. Madame Rahmani's composure wavered, just slightly. If that is true, then where did she go? Voss considered her for a moment. Then he said, that is the wrong question. He stepped toward the door. The correct question, he continued, is who ensured that we would ask the wrong one? Behind him, the cabin remained unchanged. The story it told had begun to unravel. And somewhere within that unravelling, a second truth, quieter, more dangerous, waited to be recognised. Chapter 6. The hour that rewrote itself. The ferry did not slow, yet time aboard it altered. It did so without announcement, no bell, no visible signal, only a subtle shift in attention, as though every person had begun remembering the evening differently, adjusting small details until the memory suited them better. Alaric Voss stood once more on the upper deck, where the green lamps cast a measured glow over polished brass and careful conversation. The Nile slid past in a wide, dark ribbon, reflecting light in broken fragments. Cairo was now distant, reduced to a smudge of gold and shadow. Below, ferry's engines maintained their steady rhythm. Above, the sky offered no distraction. Voss leaned lightly against the rail, his gaze not on the river, but on the arrangement of people behind him. Let us begin again, he said. Madame Rahmani stiffened. We have already begun. A woman has disappeared. We have searched the vessel. There is nothing more to. There is always more, Voss said, not unkindly. But we have been asking the wrong sequence of questions. We have treated the disappearance as an event that occurred after dinner. That assumption deserves reconsideration. Colonel Ashford shifted his weight, his cane, tapping once against the deck. Are you suggesting she vanished before we noticed? That seems unnecessarily complicated. Complication, Voss replied, is often the price of accuracy. He turned slightly, addressing them all without raising his voice. Each of you will tell me, in your own words, what you recall of the period between the end of dinner and the moment we opened the cabin door. Not what you believe happened, only what you personally observed. Farid stepped forward immediately, as though eager to prove his usefulness. I escorted Dr. Sayegh to her cabin. She was focused. She spoke very little. She told me to return in 20 minutes. I did as instructed. When I came back, she did not answer. That is when I raised the alarm. Voss inclined his head. You did not see anyone enter or leave the corridor during that time? No, Farid said quickly. I remained on the upper deck. I was with. He hesitated. I was near the bar. I spoke with Yusuf for a few minutes. Yusuf Darwish lifted his hands in a mild gesture of agreement. We discussed a shipment that has been delayed. It was not an important conversation, but it occupied us. Farid seemed distracted. I was concerned, Farid said defensively. Dr. Sayegh was under pressure. She had enemies, he believed. You believed many things, Voss said gently. We will return to them. He turned to Colonel Ashford. And you, Colonel? Ashford cleared his throat. I remained on deck. I had coffee. Spoke with Madame Rahmani about her late husband's collection. Oh, Madame Rahmani nodded. That is correct. We were discussing a particular piece, a carved figure of uncertain origin. Miriam had expressed doubts about its authenticity. And during this conversation, Voss said, Did you observe anyone moving toward the guest cabin? Madame Rahmani frowned slightly. Was not watching the corridor. That is not my habit. However, she paused, considering. The nurse, Mademoiselle Haddad, passed through one. She said she was checking on an elderly guest who felt unwell. Layla inclined her head. That is true. Mrs. El-Kari complained of dizziness, brought her water and ensured she was comfortable. And the timing? Voss asked. Shortly after dinner, Layla said. Before Miss Mansour returned to the cabin. Voss nodded, as if confirming something privately. He turned to Captain Sard. And you, Captain? Sard drew himself up. I remained at my post. I supervised the navigation and ensured the vessel maintained its course. I did not leave the bridge during that period. Of course, Voss said. A captain must trust his crew to manage the detail. Sard's expression tightened slightly. My crew is reliable. I am certain they are, Voss replied. He fell silent for a moment. Not a pause, not an absence of speech, but a deliberate withholding, as though allowing the collected statements to arrange themselves into a pattern only could see. Then he spoke again. There is a discrepancy, he said. Farid's head snapped up. What discrepancy? Time, Voss said. He moved away from the rail, walking slowly across the deck. We have been operating under the assumption that Dr. Sayegh entered her cabin immediately after dinner and remained there until her disappearance was discovered. This assumption is supported by the locked door, the untouched coffee, and the absence of disturbance. He stopped, turning back toward them. However, this assumption requires that no one enters or leaves the corridor during that interval, and yet we have already established that at least one person did. Layla met his gaze steadily. I explained my presence. I was attending as a guest. Yes, Voss said. You explained it clearly, which is precisely why it requires examination. Madame Rahmani's voice sharpened. Surely you are not suggesting. I suggest nothing, Voss said. I observe that the only confirmed movement between the public areas and the private corridor during the relevant period was made by someone whose role grants them both access and invisibility. Layla's expression did not change. Are you accusing me? She asked. Accusation, Voss said, is a conclusion. I have not yet reached it. He stepped closer to her, not threatening, not confrontational, merely precise. You move quietly, he said. Not in the manner of someone attempting to be silent, but in the manner of someone for whom silence is natural. Pass through spaces without drawing attention. You are trusted. You are expected to be present in moments of discomfort. Layla's hands remained steady at her side. That is my profession. Indeed, Voss said, and a useful one in many circumstances. Farid shook his head. This is absurd. Layla has no reason. She barely knew Dr. Sayegh. Why would anyone do anything? Voss asked softly. That is the question we have not yet addressed. He turned away from Layla, returning to the centre of the deck. There is another matter, he said. The statement. Madame Rahmani exhaled sharply. We have discussed this. Miriam intended to expose certain information. That is why she came. And yet, Voss said, there is no evidence that such a statement existed in written form. No draft, no notes. Only the expectation that it would be produced. Colonel Ashford frowned. Are you suggesting she fabricated the entire premise? I suggest, Voss said, the statement may have served a purpose other than its declared one. Farid's voice faltered. You mean she never intended to present it? I mean, Voss said, that she intended us to believe she would. The implication settled over the group, altering their understanding of the evening's events. Madame Rahmani's composure cracked slightly. If that is true, then why come at all? Voss looked at her, his expression calm, almost detached. To meet someone, he said. The words hung in the air, simple and precise. Farid shook his head slowly, but she met no one. She went directly to her cabin. No, Voss said. She did not. The certainty in his tone cut through the confusion. She arranged for us to believe she would remain in her cabin. She created a closed space, a locked room, before the room was ever locked. In doing so, she ensured that when her absence was discovered, our attention would be directed inward, not outward. Layla's gaze sharpened just slightly. You think she left the cabin before it was locked, she said. I think, Voss replied, that the locked door is not the beginning of the story, but its conclusion. Captain Sard stepped forward, his voice controlled but strained. That is impossible. The door was locked from the inside. I confirmed it myself. Yes, Voss said. You confirmed what the door wished to tell you. And what does it wish to tell us? Sard demanded. That no one could have entered or left, Voss said, which is precisely what someone would want us to believe. He paused, then added almost gently, but belief is not evidence. Farid ran a hand through his hair, his composure unraveled. Then where did she go? If she left the cabin before it was locked, if she never stayed there, then where was she during that time? Voss looked out over the river. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke. She was here, he said. He gestured, not to the corridor, not to the lower compartments, but to the deck itself. With us, he added. The realization moved through them unevenly, like a current encountering resistance. Madame Rahmani's eyes widened. That is absurd. We would have seen her. Would you? Voss asked. He turned back to them. Or would you have seen what you expected to see? Layla's voice was quieter now. You are saying, she disguised it herself. I am saying, Voss replied, that identity is often less stable than we assume. He stepped closer to the rail again, his posture unchanged, his expression composed. The evening has been constructed around a single certainty, he continued, that Dr. Miriam Sayegh entered her cabin and vanished from within it. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. But what if, he said, she never entered it at all? The question did not resolve anything, fractured everything. And in that fracture, a new possibility emerged, one that did not simplify the mystery, but deepened it beyond comfort. Voss reached into his pocket. Another knot. The ribbon was beginning to shorten. Chapter 7. The guest who was almost seen. The idea did not settle. Moved through the group like a draft beneath the door. Felt. Not acknowledged. Altering the temperature of every thought without presenting itself for inspection. Alaric Voss did not attempt to force it into acceptance. He allowed it to exist, incomplete, while he arranged the next step. Captain, he said, require every guest and crew member to gather in the saloon. No exceptions. The ferry will continue its course, but its attention must shift. Captain Sard hesitated only briefly before nodding. Very well, I will have them assemble. Within minutes, the cedar-panelled saloon filled again. The long table where dinner had been served now stood cleared, its polished surface reflecting the lamps above with a quiet indifference. Chairs were drawn back, not in order, but in a loose semicircle, as though the room itself anticipated a kind of confrontation it could not name. The guests returned with varying degrees of composure. Mrs. Elkery, pale but alert, held a glass of water in both hands, as if anchoring herself. Yusuf Darwish resumed his polite smile, though it now seemed rehearsed rather than instinctive. Colonel Ashford stood slightly apart, his cane angled across his body like a quiet barrier. Layla Haddad moved among them briefly, adjusting a chair here, offering reassurance there, small acts that reinforced her position as someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Farid remained close to the table, his posture tense, gaze fixed on Voss with a mixture of hope and dread. When all had gathered, Voss stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we have been treating this evening as a disappearance. That is understandable. It is also, I believe, incorrect. A murmur moved through the room, restrained but undeniable. Madame Rahmani folded her hands. You have suggested as much. Perhaps you would now clarify your... I will, Voss said, but clarity requires cooperation. Each of you will consider carefully what you observed. Not what you assumed, not what you later concluded, but what you actually saw. He paused, letting the distinction take hold. Dr. Miriam Sayegh, he continued, is believed to have retired to her cabin shortly after dinner. This belief is supported by her own statement of intent and by the testimony of Mr. Mansour, who escorted her to the corridor. Farid nodded quickly. Yes, I walked with her. I saw her reach the door. You saw her reach the door, Voss repeated. Did you see her enter? Farid opened his mouth, then closed it again. She? He hesitated. She unlocked it. I assumed. You assumed, Voss said gently. Yes, Farid's voice faltered. I did not watch her step inside. It would have been intrusive. Of course, Voss said. You respected her privacy. He turned to the others. From that moment onward, no one claims to have seen Dr. Sayegh. And yet, we have been certain of her location. Colonel Ashford frowned. Because the door was locked. That is not an assumption. That is a fact. A fact, Voss said. That belongs to a later moment. We must not allow it to rewrite the earlier one. He moved slowly along the edge of the table, his gaze passing over each face. Consider instead, he said, that Dr. Sayegh did not enter her cabin, that she allowed us to believe she had done so, and then remained us. Room resisted the idea, not with words, but with posture, with the subtle stiffening of shoulders, the narrowing of eyes, the instinctive rejection of something that threatened to rearrange the entire... That is impossible, Madame Romani said. She would have been recognized. Would she? Voss asked. He stopped near Mrs. El-Khoury. Madame, he said, you felt unwell this evening. Mademoiselle Haddad attended to you. Yes, Mrs. El-Khoury said softly. She was very kind. And during that time, Voss continued, were you alone with her? For a few minutes, she said. Then someone else came. A woman, I thought, was one of the guests. She spoke very little. She asked if I required anything further. Farid turned sharply. A woman? Who? Mrs. El-Khoury frowned, searching for her memory. I do not know. She wore a shawl. It covered her hair. I assumed. She hesitated. I assumed it was Madame Rahmani, or perhaps another guest I had not yet. Madame Rahmani shook her head. I did not leave the deck at that time. Voss inclined his head slightly. Thank you, he said. He turned back to the group. We have, then, a brief appearance of an unidentified woman in the private corridor. A woman who spoke little, concealed her hair, and who was accepted without question, because she fit the general expectation of a guest. Farid's voice rose. You mean Dr. Sayegh, disguised? That is no, she would not. She would not, Voss said. A woman who values control, who distrusts others, who arrives with a purpose she does not fully reveal. Such a woman might find disguise a useful tool. Layla's expression remained composed, her attention sharpened. And what purpose would that serve, she asked. To move unseen, Voss said. To meet someone without interruption. To create in advance the illusion of a locked room. Colonel Ashford tapped his cane again, more sharply this time. This is speculation. Even if she disguised herself, even if she remained on deck, what then? She still vanished. We return to the same problem. Not the same problem, Voss said. A different one. He moved to the centre of the room. If Dr. Sayegh did not enter her cabin, then the locked door becomes irrelevant to her disappearance. It becomes a stage, not a scene, a construction designed to mislead. Farid shook his head, his composure slipping. But the coffee, the case, the everything was there. It cannot all be false. Not false, Voss said. Rain. He let the word settle. Someone, he continued, entered that cabin after Dr. Sayegh chose not to. Someone placed the coffee. Positioned the orange. Someone ensured the door would later be found locked from within. Captain Sard's voice tightened. That would require access. Knowledge of the cabin. Knowledge of the locks. Yes, Voss said. It would. The implication moved through the room with greater force now, not abstract, directed. Layla spoke, her tone calm but firm. You are narrowing your focus. Too quickly, perhaps. Many people have access to the cabins. The crew, the stewards, those who move among them without question, Voss said. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. Farid stepped forward, voice urgent. Even if all of this is true, even if she never entered the cabin, where did she go after leaving the corridor? She cannot simply vanish on an open deck. No, Voss said. She cannot. He turned slightly, his gaze moving. Not to the doors, not to the window, but to the floor. The answer, he said, is not above us. He let the words linger, then added, it is below. A silence followed. Not empty, full. Layla's hand, almost imperceptibly, tightening around the edge of a chair. Colonel Ashford frowned. You mean the lower compartment, but we have searched for them. There is nothing there but crates and damp wood. Nothing visible, Voss said, which is not the same as nothing present. Madame Rahmani's voice was strained, her control thinning. You speak as though she is still aboard, as though she has been hidden. Voss looked at her. Yes, he said. I do. The certainty in his tone altered the room again. This time did not fracture understanding. It focused on it, Farid whispered. Hidden? By whom? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and touched the pale blue ribbon. Another knot. Fewer now. Then he said, very quietly, by the only person who could move her without being seen. Layla's gaze did not shift, but something within it changed, just enough. And Voss, been waiting for that change, recognized it at once. Chapter 8. What the nurse never needed to hide, the saloon did not erupt. That, more than anything, confirmed to Alaric Voss that the truth had begun to approach recognition. People do not shout when they are close to understanding. They become careful. Layla Haddad did not protest. She did not step back, did not raise her voice, did not attempt to redirect attention. She simply remained where she stood, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady. This stillness was not innocent. It was controlled. You believe I moved her, she said at last. Her tone was almost conversational. That is a serious conclusion to reach on so little. I have not reached it, Voss replied. I have approached it. There is a difference. Approaches can still turn aside. Conclusions cannot. Layla inclined her head slightly. Then perhaps you should allow yourself more distance before you proceed. A reasonable suggestion, Voss said. And yet distance has been our problem from the beginning. We have been too far from the truth. It is time to stand closer. He stepped toward the table, not toward her. This evening, he continued, has been arranged with care, not only the disappearance, but the expectations surrounding it. Dr. Sayegh declared her intention to prepare a statement. She ensured we would all be aware of it. She made herself the centre of a future event. Farid nodded, his voice urgent. Yes, she said it would be decisive. She would expose certain matters. And yet, Voss said, no statement exists, no draft, no notes, only the promise of one. Madame Rahmani's voice cut in, sharp with frustration. We have already established this. What does it prove? It proves, Voss said, that Dr. Sayegh wished to control not only what we would think after her disappearance, but what we would think before it. He turned slightly, gaze sweeping the room. She created a narrative in advance. A woman under pressure, a woman with enemy, woman preparing to reveal something dangerous. Colonel Ashford shifted his cane. And that narrative served her how? It ensured that when she vanished, Voss said, we would look for an external cause. An enemy, a thief, a rival. Farid's voice faltered. But that is reasonable. She did have enemies. Yes, Voss said, which makes the narrative effective. He paused, then added, it is not complete. Layla's gaze remained steady. You suggest she intended something else. I suggest, Voss replied, that she came aboard to meet someone, not publicly, not as herself, but as someone who could pass unnoticed. Mrs. El-Khoury shifted slightly, voice tentative. The woman with the shawl. Yes, Voss said. A figure that fits within expectation. Not memorable, not distinct. Presence that can be dismissed without effort. Farid shook his head slowly. But why such secrecy? Why not simply arrange a meeting openly? Cause, Voss said. The meeting itself was dangerous. The word settled into the room with quiet weight. Madame Rahmani's fingers tightened around it. Dangerous to whom? Voss did not answer her directly. Instead, he turned his attention back to Layla. You move between spaces, he said, between public and private, between attention and invisibility. You are trusted to enter rooms without question. You are expected to attend to discomfort without being noticed yourself. Layla's expression did not change. That is my role, she said. Yes, Voss said, and roles, when properly understood, become tools. He moved closer now, though still not directly confronting her. The orange peel, he said. It does not belong to the meal. It does not belong to the cabin. It belongs to a person. A person who carries small controlled habits into every space they occupy. He paused. You prepared it, he said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. Layla's fingers tightened slightly on the chair. Great many people are capable of peeling an orange, she said. It is not a rare skill. No, Voss said, but it is rarely performed with such precision in the absence of necessity. It is a habit, a controlled act, a way of imposing order. He reached into his pocket and touched the pale blue ribbon. There are others who impose order, he added quietly. But they do so differently. Farid's voice broke in, desperate now. Even if Layla, prepared the peel, what does that prove? It does not explain the disappearance. It does not explain the lower compartment, the hidden space, the stain, Voss said. The word stopped. Yes, Voss continued. The stain in the hidden space. Small, contained, recently. Not water, Madame Rahmani's composure faltered. I think, Voss said, that Dr. Sayek did not leave this ferry. The room tightened again. Layla's gaze sharpened, just slightly. You have said that before, she said. Petition does not make it more true. No, Voss said, but accumulation does. He turned away from her, addressing the room once more. We have, then, a sequence. Dr. Sayeg arrives with a declared purpose. She creates an expectation of a statement. She allows herself to be seen entering the corridor, but not the cabin. She remains among us briefly, disguised. She meets someone. Farid whispered, Leela. Voss did not confirm it, he continued. After this meeting, Dr. Sayeg is no longer seen. Her absence is constructed as a disappearance from a locked room. The cabin is arranged to support this illusion. The lower compartments reveal a hidden space, recently used. He paused, and within that space, a stain that does not belong. Silence followed, not empty, dense. Layla spoke again, her voice still calm, but lower now. You have constructed a narrative, she said. It is elegant, it is detailed, but it is still a narrative. You have not answered the central question. And what is that? Voss asked. What happened to her? Layla said. Voss looked at her. For a moment he said nothing. Then he replied, She trusted the wrong person. The words did not accuse. They settled. Layla's expression did not break, but something within it shifted. Something small, something controlled. You assume trust, she said. You assume intention. You assume a great deal about a woman who is not here to confirm it. I assume, Voss said, only what the evidence... He stepped closer, his voice quiet, precise. And the evidence permits this. Dr. Sayeg met someone in private. That person had access to the lower compartments. That person had the ability to move without attracting attention. That person had the presence of mind to construct a false narrative. He paused. And that person, he added, remains among us. Farid's breath caught. Then say it. If you believe you know, say it. Voss did not look at him. His gaze remained on Layla. Not yet, he said. Refusal was deliberate. Layla's fingers relaxed slightly on the chair. You hesitate, she said. Perhaps because you are not as certain as you would appear. I hesitate, Voss replied, because certainty is not a tool to be used carelessly. It must be applied at the correct moment. He stepped back. The moment, he said, is not yet. He turned toward the door. We will return below, he continued. There is one detail we have not yet examined. It is small. It is easily overlooked. And it will decide everything. Farid stared at him. What detail? Voss paused at the threshold. Then he said, the absence. He left the room without further explanation. Behind him, the others followed. Not because they understood, but because they no longer trusted their own understanding without him. Layla was the last to move. For a moment, she remained still, her gaze fixed on the empty space Voss had occupied. Then she turned and followed. Chapter 9. The weight that was not there. The second descent felt different. Not because the space had changed, because their understanding of it had. Alaric Voss did not hurry. He moved with the same measured precision as before. Something in him had settled. Not certainty, he would not allow himself that indulgence until the final moment, but alignment. The scattered pieces had begun to accept their positions. Behind him, the others followed with less hesitation and more tension. Farid no longer spoke. His earlier urgency had been replaced by a strained silence, as though words might accelerate a conclusion he feared to hear. Madame Rahmani held herself upright, her composure restored but thinner, like fabric, stretched too tightly across a frame. Colonel Ashford's cane struck the steps with quiet insistence, each tap marking his discomfort rather than his authority. Layla descended last, still silent, still composed, but not untouched. Voss noticed the smallest alteration, a fraction of delay at the final step, briefest adjustment of balance before she entered the lower compartment. There was no hesitation, it was recognition. She knew what he was about to show them. That, more than anything, confirmed it. The compartment below seemed narrower now, the ceiling lower, the air closer. The lantern light stretched across the floor in a thin band, leaving the corners to hold their own secrets. Voss walked directly to the misaligned crate. He did not speak. He shifted it aside. The narrow panel behind it remained as before, slightly displaced, no longer capable of pretending to be part of the continuous wall. He opened it without effort. Hidden space revealed itself again. The same narrow confines, the same rough wood, the same faint, contained stain. Nothing had changed. And yet, carefully, Voss said, not loudly, not urgently, but with a precision that demanded attention. Farid stepped forward first, his breath uneven. I see it, the stain. We have already, not the stain, Voss said. Farid stopped. Voss raised the lantern slightly, angling the light not at the floor, but along the wall. Here, he said. The light traced the interior surfaces, the rough grain, the small imperfection, the places where the wood had been cut and fitted without concern. Then it stopped. On a section of wall just above the floor, there, faint but visible under the shifting light, were marks, not scratches, not stains, indentations, parallel, evenly spaced, as if something had rested there for a period of time. Colonel Ashford leaned closer. What is that? Damage from cargo? No, Voss said. Too regular, too contained. It is not damaged, it is a memory. Madame Rahmani frowned. Memory of what? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped into the narrow space, placing the lantern on the floor so that the light rose upward, casting the marks into clearer relief. He crouched. Then, slowly, he extended his hand, not to touch the wall, but to measure the distance between the indentation. His fingers moved with deliberate care, as though confirming something he had already concluded. Yes, he said quietly. Farid's voice trembled. Yes, what? Voss straightened. The space, he said, was not empty. A silence followed, not confusion. Recognition, still incomplete. Madame Rahmani spoke first, her voice tight. Of course it was not empty. We have already considered that Dr. Sayegh may have been... No, Voss said. She was not placed here. The words fell with quiet force. Farid stared at him. But the stain, the hidden panel, everything suggests, Voss interrupted gently, what we have been encouraged to believe. He gestured to the indentations. These marks were made by an object, not a body. The spacing is too regular. The pressure is too consistent. A human form does not rest in such a way. Colonel Ashford frowned. Then what was here? Voss looked at the wall for a moment longer. Then he said, a container. The word shifted the entire space. Farid's breath caught. A container? For what? For something of value, Voss said. Something that required concealment. Something that could be removed without attracting attention. Madame Rahmani's composure fractured slightly. You are speaking of smuggling. I am speaking, Voss said, of movement, of objects passing through spaces where they are not meant to be observed. He turned, his gaze moving through the opening to the others. Dr. Sayegh was an appraiser of antiquities, he continued. She identified objects, traced their origins, and determined their authenticity. She understood value, not only in monetary terms, but in historical significance. Yusuf Darvish shifted uncomfortably near the entrance. Yes, that is well known. What of it? What of it? Voss echoed softly. Places her in direct opposition to those who profit from objects without history. Yusuf's smile flickered. You imply a great deal, Monsieur Voss. I imply nothing, Voss said. I observe that a hidden space exists within this ferry, a space that has been used to conceal objects, space that is not part of the official structure. He paused, and I observe that Dr. Sayegh arrived, with a declared intention to expose certain... Farid's voice dropped to a whisper. You think she discovered this? I think, Voss said, that she came here knowing it existed. The realization moved through them slowly. Madame Rahmani's eyes widened. Then the meeting, the disguise. Yes, Voss said. She arranged to meet the person responsible, not to expose them publicly, but to confront them privately. Lila's voice entered, calm but quiet. And you believe that person killed her? Voss turned to her. I believe, he said, the meeting did not proceed as she intended. Layla's gaze held his. And the container? She asked. Where is it now? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped out of the narrow space, returning to the larger compartment. He lifted the lantern and slowly across the floor, his eyes tracing the faint lines of dampness, the subtle variations in the wood. Then he stopped. At a point several feet from the hidden panel he crouched. Here, he said. The others gathered, their attention drawn to the same spot. At first, there was nothing. Then a difference. The floorboard here sat slightly higher than those around it, not enough to be noticed in passing, not enough to disrupt movement, just enough. Voss placed his hand against it, pressed. It shifted. A hollow sound followed. Captain Sard stepped forward, his composure breaking. "That is not part of the original design. I would have known." "Yes," Voss said. "You would have." He lifted the edge of the board. Beneath it, darkness. And space. Not large, but sufficient. Farid's voice shook. "Another compartment." "Not." "Another," Voss said. "The one." He set the board aside and lowered the lantern into the opening. The light revealed the interior. Empty, completely. No container, no object, no trace of what had once been there. Only the faint imprint of weight. Single small detail. Near the edge of the space, barely visible in the dim light, a fragment of fabric, pale blue. Voss looked at it. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket. The ribbon. He untied one knot. Not all of them, just one. Farid stared at him. "What does that mean?" Voss replaced the ribbon in his pocket. "It means," he said quietly, "we have been looking in the wrong direction." He straightened. For the first time since the beginning of the investigation, he became very still. Chapter 10. The explanation that refused mercy. The lantern light did not flicker. That, more than anything, gave the moment its peculiar steadiness. Nothing dramatic occurred. No sudden movement, no raised voices. Only the quiet reassembly of truth, piece by piece, until denial could no longer find space to stand. Alaric Voss replaced the loose floorboard with the same care one might show to a fragile instrument. He did not rush. He did not look at the others while he worked. When he stood again, he turned, not toward the hidden panel, not toward the stain, toward Layla Haddad. "You will forgive me," he said, his tone calm, almost courteous, "if I now describe what occurred this evening." Layla did not move. "Description," she said quietly, "is not the same as truth." "No," Voss replied, "but it is how we arrive at it." He stepped forward, placing himself where the lantern light fell evenly across his face. It gave his features a clarity that felt deliberate, though even the shadows had agreed to cooperate. "Dr. Miriam Sayegh came aboard this ferry with a purpose," she declared openly. He began. She spoke of a statement, of exposure, of revealing certain matters connected to collections and their origins. Madame Rahmani's breath caught. She said nothing. This declaration, Voss continued, served to create expectation. It ensured that every guest understood her role in the evening's narrative. She was to be the woman who would reveal the truth. He paused, allowing the idea to settle. "But this was not her true intention," he said. "Her true intention was far more precise." Farid swallowed. "To meet someone." "Yes," Voss said. "To meet the person responsible for what she had discovered." He turned slightly, his gaze moving across the group before returning to Layla. "She knew of the hidden compartment," he continued. "She knew it had been used to conceal objects. Objects that should not have been transported. Objects that had no legitimate history. She came here not to expose this publicly, but to confront the person privately." Colonel Ashford's voice was low. "She disguised herself to do so." "Yes," Voss said. "She allowed us to believe she had entered her cabin. She created the illusion of absence while remaining present. She moved through the ferry as an unremarkable figure, seen but not recognized." "Mrs." Cowrie shifted, her voice trembling slightly. "The woman with the shawl." Voss inclined his head. "Precisely." Layla's expression remained composed, though her eyes had sharpened. "And you believe that woman met me?" "Me," she said. "I do not believe," Voss replied. "I conclude." He let the word stand. "You had access to the lower compartments," he continued. "You moved between spaces without attracting attention. You were trusted. You were expected to be present in moments of discomfort." He paused. "And you prepared the orange peel." Layla's lips pressed together, but she did not interrupt. "The peel was not random," Voss said. "It was a marker, a habit, carried into a space where it did not belong. It connected the cabin to the person who arranged it, a person who valued control, precision, quiet order." He stepped closer. "You met Dr. Sayegh below," he said. "In the hidden space. She confronted you. She presented what she knew." Farid's voice broke. "And then?" "And then," Voss said, "the situation changed." He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize the moment. He simply allowed the truth to take its place. "She did not intend to disappear," he said, "but she intended to control the outcome. She believed she could negotiate, perhaps threaten, perhaps compel cooperation." Layla's gaze did not waver. "You assume a great deal about her confidence," she said. I observe it, Voss replied. It is present in everything she did. He turned slightly, addressing the others as well. But she misjudged one element, he continued. She misjudged you. The words settled into the space with quiet finality. Layla's fingers tightened once, just once, against the fabric of her sleeve. Go on, she said. Voss inclined his head. You did not respond as she expected, he said. You did not argue. You did not deny. You did not attempt to persuade her. You acted. Farid stepped back, his face pale. You mean she? Yes, Voss said. She died below. The simplicity of the statement made it heavier. Madame Rahmani closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, though refusing the comfort of denial. And the body, she asked, her voice controlled but strained. Where is it? Voss turned back to the hidden panel. It was never meant to remain, he said. He gestured toward the compartment. The container that had been stored here, the one whose absence we observed, was used to remove it. Colonel Ashford's brow furrowed. Remove it? How? By the river, Voss said. The lower compartments provide access points not visible from the deck. The ferry moves. The water carries away what it is given. Farid's voice dropped to a whisper. You disposed of her? Layla did not respond immediately. When she did, voice was unchanged. You describe a sequence, she said, but you have not explained the most important part. Why? Voss regarded her quietly. For protection, he said. The word did not accuse, it was revealed. Layla's expression shifted, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who did not know where to look, but Voss saw it, a softening, a fracture beneath control. You discovered the smuggling operation, he continued, not recently, but long ago. You understood how it functioned, you understood who benefited from it, and you chose not to expose it. Madame Rahmani's breath caught. You suggest she was involved? No, Voss said. I suggest she protected it. He turned fully to Layla. Because it was not merely an operation, he said. It was a legacy. The word lingered. Layla's composure thinned. My father, she said quietly. No one spoke. He worked on this ferry for the charity. Before any of you ever stepped aboard, he knew the routes, the compartments, the places no one looked. Her voice did not rise, did not tremble. But something within it had shifted irreversibly. He died believing he had secured something for us, she said. For me. For a future that did not depend on the approval of men like you. Her gaze moved briefly across the group, then returned to Voss. Dr. Sayegh would have destroyed that, she said. Not out of necessity, not out of justice. Out of principle. Out of the satisfaction of being correct. Voss did not interrupt. She came to threaten me, Layla said. To force a confession. To take what she believed was hers to reveal. Her hands stilled completely. And I chose, she said, not to allow it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of recognition. Farid's voice broke. You killed her to protect this. Layla did not look at him. I killed her to protect what she did not understand. Voss inclined his head slightly. Protection, he said. A powerful motive. He reached into his pocket. The pale blue ribbon emerged, knotted, almost to its end. He looked at it for a moment. Then, slowly, he untied the final knot and let the ribbon fall straight. Contradictions are resolved, he said quietly. He met Layla's gaze. And so, are you? Chapter 11. The river keeps. What? Given the ferry did not stop immediately, that too felt appropriate. Events aboard it had not followed urgency, and their conclusion would not surrender to it now. Nur el-Nil continued its measured passage through the darkened water, the engines steady, the lamps unwavering, as though the truth, once revealed, required no alteration of pace. Alaric Voss stood again at the brass rail. The orange peel was gone, not removed with ceremony, not discarded with intent, simply absent, as though it had completed its role and withdrawn from the narrative it had helped construct. Behind him, the saloon held the remnants of confrontation. Layla Haddad had not resisted. When Captain Saad, his authority finally restored through necessity rather than certainty, had stepped forward to place her under restraint. She had extended her hands without hesitation. No struggle, no plea, only the quiet acceptance of a sequence that had reached its conclusion. Farid had not spoken since. He remained seated, his posture collapsed inward, his hands clasped tightly together, as though holding on to something that had already slipped beyond his grasp. The certainty he had carried, the belief in Dr. Sayegh's control, her clarity, her inevitability, had fractured beyond repair. Madame Rahmani had withdrawn to the far end of the deck, her composure intact in form, but altered in substance. She no longer addressed the evening as an event to be managed. It had become something else, something that could not be arranged into polite conclusion. Colonel Ashford had lit a cigarette he did not smoke, allowing it to burn between his fingers, until the ash lengthened dangerously. He seemed less interested in judgment than in the recognition of a system he had preferred not to see. The river continued. Voss did not turn when he sensed Lila's presence beside him. She had not been taken below. Not yet. Captain Sard had allowed her a final moment above deck, under watch but not confinement. Perhaps he believed it an act of mercy. Perhaps he understood, without naming it, that certain endings required space. "You have arranged it neatly," Layla said. Her voice was unchanged, not defiant, not broken, simply present. "Neatness," Voss replied, "is not an arrangement, it is recognition." She rested her hands lightly against the rail, mirroring his posture without imitation. "The river," she said, "does not recognize anything. It takes what it is given and carries it away." "Yes," Voss said, "which is why people trust it with their secrets." A faint smile touched her lip. "You think this is a secret?" she asked. "You have explained it to everyone. There is nothing hidden." "There is always something hidden," Voss said. "Not in the facts. In meaning." He turned then, looking at her directly. "You protected your father," he said. "Not the operation, not the objects. Him." Layla's gaze held his. "He believed he was building something, something that would outlast him, something that would justify the compromises." "And you?" Voss asked. "I believed him," she said. The simplicity of it carried more weight than any justification. Voss inclined his head slightly. "Belief," he said, "often more durable than truth." She looked out over the water again. "Dr. Sayegh did not believe in anything," she said. "Only in correctness. Only in the satisfaction of exposing what others preferred to leave untouched." "She believed in order," Voss said. "In the idea that truth, once revealed, restores balance." Layla shook her head. "There is no balance," she said. "Only consequence." The words settled between them, not as disagreement, but as parallel understanding. For a moment, neither spoke. The water answered nothing. At length, Layla said, "You knew before you said it." "Yes," Voss replied. "Before the hidden space," she continued. "Before the second compartment. Before the ribbon, whatever that is." "Yes," Voss said again. She turned slightly toward him. "When?" she asked. Voss considered the question. Then he said, "When you did not adjust your steps." She frowned, not in confusion, but in recognition. "The corridor," she said. "Yes," Voss said. "Most people, attempting to move quietly, become aware of their own. They change it. They reveal intention through effort." "And I did not," she said. "No," Voss replied. "You moved as though silence were your natural state," which suggested long familiarity with being unnoticed. Layla exhaled softly. "A small detail," she said. "A decisive one," Voss said. He reached into his pocket. The pale blue ribbon lay unknotted now, surface smooth, its length restored. "I record contradictions," he said. "When they accumulate, they form a pattern. When the pattern resolves, the knots are no longer necessary." Layla looked at the ribbon. "And now?" she asked. "Now," Voss said, "it returns to its original form." She watched him for a moment longer. Then she nodded, as though confirming something to herself rather than to him. Captain Sard approached, his steps firm now, his role re-established. "It is time," he said. Layla did not resist. She turned once more to the river. Then, without hesitation, she stepped away from the rail. As she passed Voss, she paused briefly. "Do you believe," she said, "that what I protected was worth it?" The question was not rhetorical. It was not defensive. It was genuine. Voss did not answer immediately. He looked out over the water, where the ferry's wake dissolved into darkness almost as soon as it formed. Then he said, "Worth is not a stable measure." She waited. "It changes," he continued, "depending on what one is willing to lose." Layla considered this. Then she inclined her head. "Then I suppose," she said, "I have my answer." She walked with Captain Sard toward the interior of the ferry. No one spoke as she passed. The door closed behind her. Voss remained at the rail. The absence of the orange peel left a small, precise gap in the arrangement of the space, not noticeable to most, not important to anyone else. But to Voss, it marked the completion of a sequence. He placed the ribbon back into his pocket. The ferry continued its course. The river accepted everything it was given, and, somewhere beneath its surface, Truth moved quietly away from the place it had been. Voss watched the water for a moment longer. Then he turned, not with satisfaction, not with regret, but with the calm understanding that resolution is never as complete as it appears.